Yeah, so I mean, this has obviously always been like a complex aspect to the Venezuelan sort of project because it's a country so tied to oil, and it leads to various different readings. So I think there's a couple of things that are important to break down. First thing, the simple response is often, well, what Venezuela did was only possible because of high commodity prices and in particular oil prices. Well, we have to remember that when Chavez was elected in 1998, oil prices don't really start to take off until somewhere in the mid-2000s. So there was certainly a period of time very early on in Chavez's government for a number of years where the barrel of oil was, we're talking $10, $15, nowhere near the $50 to $100 US dollars that it would later achieve. So it's not a case that from the start Chavez had this bonanza and was just able to use that. Secondly, when we discussed the question of the oil lockout in 2002, 2003, Chavez doesn't nationalize the oil industry because it's already in state hands. But that state oil company had always, as many state oil companies do around the world today, functioned for the benefit of transnational capital. I mean, no one honestly believes the Saudi, state oil company is some kind of model of socialism or social redistribution. The state has an important role to play in that, but it plays that basically as an adjunct to global capital that's flowing in and out of Saudi Arabia, and it's not working towards a peoples-based model in Saudi Arabia by any stretch of the imagination. So that important battle that happens in PDVSA is also required for Chavez to be able to make use of the oil revenue. And again, so that gets lost in the kind of idea that this is all because of high commodity prices. That said, it is still true that Venezuela had the problem, or still has the problem, of a highly oil-dependent economy, which creates all sorts of problems in terms of its ability to diversify its economy, its ability to have to deal with sanctions. Of course, when you are able to cut off just one particular industry, that has a huge impact on the government's ability to get revenue. But I think if I was to say, one thing is that I think that there's two important lessons that I believe are worthwhile, at least taking from the Chavez project, whilst at the same time understanding that obviously didn't come up with a formula to overcome the question of this is still a big challenge that the left faces, and particularly in those countries that are very natural resource rich. I think the first one is that Chavez did understood that even with oil at a very low price, that it was important to make rapid, important gains to people's living standards. Discourse and red flags wasn't enough. That day-to-day changes in people's living standards were crucial to maintaining his popular support in those first years. And that's very much what he dedicated himself to. The second thing, though, was that he recognized that it wasn't enough to just do that. That ultimately, if the oil wealth was going to somehow feed a popular project, they needed to find mechanisms to be able to redistribute that, but not simply redistribute it through the state determining that money would go to particular healthcare, education, but also seeing how that could be used to help with the organizing of the. And Venezuela is a funny place, because if someone had have asked a leftist in the 90s, where would you imagine a radical left project to occur in South America? I don't think you would have found anyone who would pick Venezuela. That's not to say it hadn't had big spontaneous protests, as we saw, for instance, with the Caracazo in 1989. But it's not a country that had movements such as like the movement of landless workers, the MST in Brazil, didn't have the piqueteros, unemployed movement like Argentina did. It didn't have the indigenous movements like Bolivia and Ecuador did. All these other countries had movements that most leftists could probably name, and speak to you at length with. But if you asked them about Venezuela, they would be like, well, there's nothing happening there.